The real estate conspiracy that cost me everything. When I decided to sell my house in Austin, Texas, I thought the hardest part would be saying goodbye to the place where I'd raised my kids. I was dead wrong. The hardest part was discovering that my trusted real estate agent had been running a multi-million-dollar scam right under my nose, using my home as just another pawn in her elaborate scheme. It all started innocently enough. I'm Tom, 45 years old, recently divorced, and needed to downsize after my ex-wife got the bigger house in our settlement. My little 3-bedroom ranch in South Austin had served me well for 8 years, but with both kids now in college, alimony, payments draining my savings, and mounting credit card debt from the divorce, it was time to cash out. The neighborhood had been gentrifying like crazy. Houses that sold for $300K when I bought mine were now going for $800K or more. I figured this was my financial lifeline. I found Sandra Martinez through my neighbor Jeff, who'd sold his place through her 6 months earlier and couldn't stop raving about the experience. She had this polished LinkedIn profile with hundreds of connections, 5-star Google reviews, and claimed to specialize in my exact neighborhood. Mid-30s, always, impeccably dressed, driving a white Tesla Model S that screamed success. During our initial meeting at a Starbucks on South Lamar, she pulled up recent comparable sales on her iPad and confidently told me we could list at $795,000. The house had good bones. Updated kitchen with granite countertops, hardwood floors, throughout. A decent backyard with mature oak trees. Sure, it needed some cosmetic work, but nothing major. I'd never noticed any structural issues in 8 years of living there. Sandra arranged for professional photos, had a slick listing description written up, and within 2 weeks we had the house on the market. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. Then the first red flag appeared, though I didn't recognize it at the time. After just 3 days on the market, Sandra called with concerning news. A potential buyer's inspector had found some significant structural issues during their walkthrough. She recommended we get our own inspection done immediately before other buyers discovered the same problems. Her tone was urgent. She kept emphasizing that every day we waited was another day for word to spread in the real estate community. Updated. Still processing this whole nightmare 2 years later. The manipulation was so subtle, I didn't see it coming until it was too late. Anyone else ever felt completely blindsided by someone they trusted? Sandra referred me to Bill Thompson from Lone Star Property Inspections, explaining that he was the most thorough inspector in Austin and could get us an appointment within 48 hours, crucial for staying ahead of the rumors. He seemed legitimate enough. Truck with professional logos, official-looking clipboard, even wore one of those polo shirts with his company name embroidered on it. The inspection took about 4 hours, and Bill was thorough, crawling through the attic, checking the foundation, testing electrical outlets. 2 days later, his report landed in my inbox like a financial death sentence. According to Bill, my house had severe foundation settling that would require $125,000 in repairs. The electrical system was apparently a fire hazard needing partial rewiring for another $65,000. Most devastating of all, he claimed there was potential structural damage to support beams that could cost up to $90,000 to fix properly. The total estimated repairs came to $280,000, more than a third of my asking price. I stared at the 30-page report in disbelief. 8 years of living there, and I'd never noticed any of these problems. No cracks in the walls, no sagging, floors, no electrical issues. But Bill had photos, measurements, and technical jargon that sounded convincing enough. The worst part was Sandra's reaction when I called her. She sounded genuinely concerned, but not surprised, mentioning that older homes in the area often had these hidden issues that only became apparent during thorough inspections. When I suggested getting a second opinion, Sandra gently discouraged it. She explained that word was already starting to spread about the inspection findings. Apparently the original buyer's agent had been talking. Every day we delayed would give more potential buyers time to research the property and discover the problems. She also pointed out that another inspection would cost me another $500 I couldn't afford, especially since Bill was known as the most thorough inspector in the area. If anyone was going to find additional problems, it would be him. The financial reality was crushing. My divorce had already depleted most of my savings. I was barely keeping up with alimony payments and the kids' college expenses. I couldn't afford to gamble $280,000 on repairs that might reveal even more problems. Sandra's alternative made grim financial sense. List the house as is for $475,000, which would at least give me enough to pay off my remaining mortgage and walk away with about $180,000 after commissions and closing costs. It felt like watching my retirement fund evaporate, but I couldn't see another option. Sandra assured me this was the smartest move under the circumstances, and she'd seen other sellers in similar situations make the same difficult decision. Within 24 hours of reducing the price, Sandra called with surprisingly good news. An investor, named Mike Chen, was interested in buying the house as is for the full asking price of $475,000. No inspection contingency, cash offer, quick closing. It seemed like a miracle, but Sandra explained that investors often looked for exactly these situations. Properties with known issues they could fix and flip for profit. Mike Chen turned out to be a soft-spoken guy in his 50s who showed up to the walkthrough in a Honda Civic that had seen better days. He nodded thoughtfully as Sandra pointed out the major structural problems from Bill's report, asked a few basic questions about the foundation issues, and confirmed he understood he was buying the property in its current condition. He mentioned having his own crew of contractors who specialized in exactly these types of repairs. The whole meeting lasted maybe 20 minutes. The closing happened at a title company in downtown Austin. Mike brought a cashier's check. I signed approximately 40 documents, and just like that, my house belonged to someone else. After paying off the mortgage, real estate commissions, and various closing costs, I walked away with $162,000. Far less than I'd hoped, but enough to cover my immediate debts and put a down payment on a small apartment in Cedar Park. I tried to move on with my life, but the financial stress was overwhelming. The divorce settlement had left me responsible for most of our shared debt, and losing $300,000 in expected home equity meant I couldn't pay off those credit cards as planned. I was working overtime at my tech job just to keep up with minimum payments, while living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment that cost twice what my mortgage had been. 18 months later, I was driving through my old neighborhood to grab lunch at my favorite food truck on South First, when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was my former house, completely transformed. Fresh paint, new landscaping, updated front porch, but definitely the same property. And there was a sold sign in the yard with a price that made me pull over immediately. $885,000. Sold. Sat in my car staring at that sign for probably 15 minutes. Trying to process what I was seeing. The house I'd sold for $475,000 because of catastrophic structural problems had just sold for nearly $900,000 after what appeared to be relatively minor cosmetic improvements. No construction trucks, no dumpsters, no signs of the massive foundation work that supposedly needed to happen. Updated. This moment broke something in me. Seeing that sold sign felt like being punched in the stomach by someone you trusted. What would you have done? Confronted the new owners or started investigating immediately? That weekend, I drove back to get a closer look. The new owners were outside working in their garden, so I introduced myself as the previous owner and struck up a conversation. They were a young couple from California who'd paid $885,000 and were thrilled with their purchase. When I carefully asked about any major repairs they'd had to do, they looked genuinely confused. The husband, Kevin, told me they'd hired their own inspector before buying, and aside from recommending a new garage door opener and some minor plumbing updates, everything was in excellent shape. No foundation issues, no electrical problems, no structural damage. They'd spent maybe $12,000 on cosmetic improvements, paint, landscaping, and new light fixtures. My hands were shaking as I drove home. Either Mike Chen was some kind of construction wizard who could fix $280,000 worth of structural problems for pocket change, or something much more sinister had happened. The young couple's confusion seemed genuine. They had no idea about any previous structural issues because there hadn't been any. I spent the next month obsessively researching everything I could find. Mike Chen's company, Austin Property Solutions LLC, had been formed just 4 months before he bought my house. The registered address was a UPS store mailbox on Burnett Road. When I looked up the company's other property purchases through the Travis County Appraisal District website, I found a disturbing pattern. Austin Property Solutions had bought 12 properties in the past 18 months. Every single one had been listed by Sandra Martinez. Every single one had inspection reports citing expensive structural problems. Every single one was purchased at dramatically reduced prices. And according to subsequent sales records, every single one was resold within 2 years for massive profits. But the real smoking gun came when I dug into Lone Star property inspections. Bill Thompson's business license showed 2 prior complaints for inaccurate reporting that had been settled out of court. More importantly, a cross-reference of his inspection dates showed he'd inspected 11 of the 12 properties bought by Austin Property Solutions, always finding expensive problems, always right before Sandra's clients agreed to dramatic price reductions. The scope of this operation was staggering. Conservative estimates based on public records suggested Sandra's network had generated over $4 million in profits over the past 3 years, with individual homeowners like me losing an average of $250,000 each. I finally understood how Sandra could afford that Tesla. Armed with documentation, I contacted the Texas Real Estate Commission and hired Austin attorney Patricia Williams, who specialized in real estate fraud. Patricia took one look at my research and immediately recognized the sophistication of the scheme. She also pointed out that I wasn't the first person to contact her office about Sandra Martinez. There had been 2 similar inquiries in the past 6 months. Patricia helped me file complaints with multiple agencies while gathering additional evidence. We discovered that Sandra had been operating variations of this scam for over 4 years, using at least 3 different inspector, accomplices, and 4 shell companies to purchase undervalued properties. She'd been careful to space out her purchases across different neighborhoods and use different company names to avoid pattern recognition. What made the scheme particularly insidious was how Sandra targeted vulnerable sellers. Recent divorcees, like me, elderly homeowners on fixed incomes, families facing foreclosure, anyone who couldn't afford to take risks or hire multiple independent experts to verify inspection reports. She'd literally built her wealth on other people's desperation and trust. The investigation gained momentum when Patricia connected with other victims. We formed an informal group of 7 families who'd lost a combined $1.8 million to Sandra's schemes. The pattern was always the same: urgent inspection revealing expensive problems, pressure to reduce price quickly, mysterious cash buyer appearing within days, and subsequent resale for massive profits with minimal actual repairs. The Texas Real Estate Commission moved surprisingly quickly once they saw our compiled evidence. Sandra's license was suspended pending investigation, and she was barred from representing new clients. Bill Thompson and his 2 accomplices also faced license reviews. The criminal case was more complex. While the evidence of fraud was clear, proving criminal intent and recovering stolen money proved challenging. Sandra had been smart enough to structure everything through legitimate business entities and maintain plausible deniability about the inspection reports. Sandra Martinez eventually pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy charges in federal court. She received a 4-year prison sentence and was ordered to pay $2.1 million in restitution to victims. Bill Thompson received 2 years and lost his inspection license permanently. The other accomplices received probation in exchange for cooperation. The civil litigation dragged on for another 18 months. Sandra's assets were easier to trace than expected. Apparently, she'd been overconfident about her legal exposure and hadn't hidden her profits as thoroughly as she could have. My portion of the settlement was $47,000, not nearly enough to compensate for what I'd lost, but better than nothing. I used the settlement money to finally pay off my credit cards and put a small down payment on a modest house in Pflugerville. It's not South Austin, and it's smaller than what I'd planned for retirement, but it's mine. I hired 2 different inspectors to check it out before buying, and I still get nervous every time a contractor tells me something needs expensive repairs. The whole experience fundamentally changed how I approach major financial decisions. I'm more skeptical, ask more questions, and never rely on recommendations from people who stand to profit from my choices. I also learned that when something seems too urgent or convenient, that's exactly when you need to slow down and get independent. Verification. My kids think I've become paranoid about real estate agents, and they're probably right. But I sleep better knowing I've done my homework, even if it means being the guy who asks for 3 references and Googles every contractor twice. Updated. 4 years later, I still check Sandra's prison release date occasionally. She gets out next year, and I wonder if she learned anything or if she'll just find new ways to scam people. Do you think 4 years was enough justice for stealing people's life savings?